Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back. We are back with Jim Thomas. It's the Jim and Jimbo show, I guess. But in all honesty, the more I talked with you, Jim, and you told me about kind of the cars that you've detailed throughout your vast history, some would call you a master detailer, an exquisite detailer. But in all honesty, a lot of people have questions about pads and buffing pads and then different types of paint and clear coat and soft paint, hard paint, all this stuff. And so as I'm kind of trying to develop a system for people with the Picture Perfect polish, pads are inevitably that. So I thought I'd bring you in and you can kind of tell us what you know about different types of pads.
Okay, well, fair enough. The pad structure as we know it today is so much different than it was 20 or 30 years ago, let alone 5, 10 years ago. And starting from when I started to polish cars, it was mostly with the rotary polisher with wool pads, and we had big orbital polishers with basically terry cloth bonnets. Okay. And so that was
2-handle ones.
Yes,
okay.
18-pound. They call them GEM polishers, GEM.
Okay. Oh, that's
GYM. That's another
save
one.
That for later.
But that was how we would essentially shave paint and refinish it. But the technology today with forced action polishers, I want to say that it began with stuff like the Porter cable, 7424. Yeah. Little joggle oscillation would spread a product really nicely. It didn't have much cutting power. It could do some minor stuff. It could certainly conceal different defects with what we were using mostly at the time with oil-based polishes. But going into the future, what happened from that to today is we've gone into foams a lot more, and then different structures from microfibers to from cotton wool blends and different different abrasives that will shave the paint in such a way that it's leveling. So this is really a leveling process when you start to polish. So the sanding process is really just kind of getting the paint flat enough to where you're comfortable with it. When I say flat, not without the orange peel texture, but without surface scratches that are going to show visibly within the surface. So where to start? It depends on the defects of the paint. And stop me if I'm talking too much.
No, you're good. I think this is good.
Right? So what I would say is, if you have a car, different manufacturers have different paints. You're going to have a harder paint, I find, in mostly like Japanese cars or Asian cars. Like you get a Lexus, for example, someone that keeps a car for 15 years and they bust it through the car wash, an express wash, once a month or more or less. It's going to take that wear over time to where those bristles will softly scrub into the clear coat. So when you have a rashed car surface like that compared to something like a European build, like a Porsche or Mercedes, or maybe even a Range Rover, sometimes I find that the paint's a little bit softer. It's a lot more manageable to carve out those surface imperfections, more so on, say, like a Toyota or Acura or something of those natures.
Is it possible, sorry to cut you off, but is it possible for, have you noticed too where clear coats for certain manufacturers will get harder over time or softer over time?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's just it's really hard to gauge and calculate because so many cars have had aftermarket paint on it.
Right, or that, right?
And with a detailed eye, with a seasoned eye, most guys will pick up some paint work relatively quick from the obvious things, fish eyes and runs, and then you can look in the jams and see like tape marks and those types of things. I've seen cars where I couldn't tell until I put a paint gauge on it, and then when you really look close, you start to see things. So some aftermarket paint from a factory paint is always going to be different. So European paints, they have different volatile organic compounds that aren't allowed in the U.S. with our regulations here. So we can get into the science of that on a different topic. But in regards to today, polishing paint is still the same, it's still completing the same task. It's like building a garden, man. You got tough soil, you got to work it a little bit more. You got a softer soil, sometimes you got to add different things to give it more nutrients. But with a polishing technique, you got harder paints, you're going to be more aggressive with the cutting stages. The finishing stages should still be relatively the same.
Okay, got it.
So you may spend more time on a car, but if you're doing it smart, and you're using the right combination of pads and polishes, the results should be the same as far as a flat, smooth, glossy finish, free of the imperfections that you're willing to sacrifice your time and expertise to remove, or that can be safe to remove without removing all the clear coat in an area.
That starts breaking down the confusion because and pad manufacturers don't help with the variety of colors. And one thing, as you were talking, I'm like, it's interesting that terry cloths were what you used way back in the day. And basically a microfiber pad is almost a terry cloth.
It is.
Right?
It's very close. And then you start to get into the fibers where you're mixing different wools and different cottons. And this one looks like mostly wool, but I can't tell. It probably has some cotton in it or whatnot. But when you have a wool blend pad, it's going to really be the most aggressive, from my experience, for really carving out the imperfections in a paint the fastest. But it's also it's gouging the rest of the paint around it. So to remove a scratch that is, you know, the width of a couple of hairs, you have to fan that scratch out to where it's several inches wide.
Okay.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe
you
we
just
could
got
show
to
that
just
too.
kind of level it out just a little bit, because you're removing paint all around it.
Because that's basically what you're doing when you're removing a scratch or doing paint correction, right? You're like you mentioned it before, you're shaving down the areas around that scratch.
Yes.
To make it kind of be invisible to the eye.
Well, yeah.
Right?
I mean, if anyone's ever had hardwood floors in a house and they've had to have them refinished,
Right.
they're taking wood away when they sand that
Right.
floor.
You can only do that so many times.
Every time you polish your car,
Right.
for the most part, with an aggressive compound and polish, finishing polishes are really just spreading a product and jeweling the paint. They're
Right.
not really removing much material, if any at all. The surface abrasions that we're using with these types of pads, even with the most mild of polishes, is going to remove some material. It's going to cause gouges and scratches. So, which brings to mind something that people want to be careful with, because a finishing polish is not at all the right polish to use with a pad like this.
Right.
Because it's
so
not-
you don't want to pair an aggressive pad with a light polish.
Right.
Okay. Why not?
Well, because this is here to score the paint. It's here to shave the paint. This material is here to do nothing more than shave the paint. So it's really just, it's a finer form of sandpaper, if you will.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
so if you have, and I don't know what the real exact number might be, but let's say you have a brand new or a hood that's been painted by a body shop, and the painter scuffs it with, say, 800 and lays clear and does a couple of other things. And by the time you're working your magic on it, maybe you're working with a 1500 grit sandpaper. And say it's like a super jeweled lacquer finish that's going to be shown in SEMA and a lot of other places. And it's black and it shows everything. You go back with a 2000, and sometimes you'll go back with something as high as a 5000 grit. Well, with a pad like a wool pad with a rotary polisher, I say that that's really kind of like, in my opinion, more of like a 4500 to 6500 grit rating.
Okay.
Whereas when you're with a finishing pad, like an open cell structure pad, which we'll talk about in a minute, something like this, it's like, say, 50,000 grit rating. It's really not going to do any harm to the paint. However, if you put an aggressive compound on this, you've got a grit in the compound on this super soft pad, it's going to scratch and scuff the paint.
Got it. Okay.
So reversing the combination doesn't work. You want to find the closest fit, not necessarily the ideal or exact fit, but the closest fit with the polish and the compound.
Okay. Which
presents an interesting question, because of your polish and compound and finish, it kind of sums a lot of things up. So I'm really curious to know what it's going to do with each pad, and if it makes me wrong in some ways. As technology improves, it's going to make our old thoughts wrong, and we have new ones to think.
Yes and no, though, because the way I look at it is like you just said, you don't really want to pair or you think of polishing as kind of just jeweling the paint, right? So that actually takes a lot, for me, that takes a lot of the mystique away from it, and a lot of the confusion away, because then you could be like, okay, fine. I know like a light pad or a squishy pad or a finishing pad, I guess, is just going to like finish out, add gloss, right? And so by the time I get to that stage, I'm not correcting paint really.
Correct.
So then that kind of like separates that. Okay, I just need to figure out how to correct the paint then. What pad is going to be best for removing the defects to the level that I want? I will say, which adds confusion though, is people talk about rotary to finish, and that there's no better machine than a rotary to finish with a light pad, which maybe is just a gloss thing. But I just think, okay, because if you're doing like a heavy correction, a rotary with a wool pad, would kind of be your first step. I don't know what I'm trying to say with that, but there's so much confusion. And so based on what you were saying though, it helps create less confusion as you can compartmentalize certain things, I guess.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, this is going to be bizarre coming from someone who was never in the military, but that's like telling a soldier, this 18-mile walk is great with a rucksack. Yeah, it's going to get you where you're going. It's going to get you there the quickest. I mean, you're going to have what you need when you get there, but it's a long damn hike with a lot of equipment that you don't need.
Got it.
To try to finish with a rotary, that's what I did for years, even without using an orbital polisher, but here's the difference. Back then in that era, we were using polishes and compounds that were silicone free, but they still had other oil additives that were concealing imperfections in the paint.
Got it.
So you polish You use a polishing pad like this with a rotary polisher, I'm going to tell you it's virtually impossible to finish a paint finish.
Yeah.
Now, maybe your polish does something different that I'm unaware of.
Not with a foam, with a
But
with a
it's
wool. You're still
this
gonna have
wool is going to
marks.
score it.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
so you would have to still finish with a rotary and mostly an oil-based polish, because that was
Okay.
really what was mostly available
Right.
back in the 80s and 90s, were oil-based. And oil-based polishes, they fill in the imperfections.
And that's what we're seeing with the people that are recommending finishing with a rotary. Their polishes are 20 to 30% oil.
Okay.
So they're just heavy oil stuff. So more than anything, they're
Listen,
concealing.
I've had cars that have won concours in big places here in California
Yeah.
and other areas from cars that I finished with a rotary
Yeah.
like years ago. But the truth is, if someone were used a grease and wax remover on that
Right,
car,
yeah, right.
it would have
come all
holograms,
back.
and they would be really light and subtle for
Sure.
what I was able to do.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be perfect
Yeah.
like you can achieve with a machine today.
Okay.
So you're really fighting against. You're doing something that doesn't need to be done.
Okay. So for like, if there's a person out there that has like a newer car, or they just picked up a used car and they're noticing those surface scratches, we have the fine foam finishing pads and a finish polish or whatever, or the picture perfect polish, which will work for that, because it does kind of mess everything up. The picture perfect polish it messes it up in a good way.
Okay.
But where would someone start? Like a car comes into your detail shop and it's 2 to 5 years old. Where are you telling your guys to start? What type of pad are they starting with?
Well, what I would do is I would start with the customer first to find out what their desired effect would want to be on the
Okay.
car. So let's say I look at a car and I say, listen, your paint is in 60% perfect condition. Meaning we can get it in probably that 95 percentile defect of most all of the defects. But it's going to take a 3-stage multi-level polishing process. Now, it's the difference between doing a 1-stage polish with a very soft foam pad that in a finishing polish, and working over the car in an hour, and it's going to put a really tremendous gloss to the paint that's there, but it's going to really highlight all the imperfections. Say I charge $300 to do that. If I wanted to do a 2-step polish and I use a more of a polishing compound, not so much a cutting compound, but I use a medium state polish with a firmer pad, and I give it the 1 step to shave most of those scratches out, that'll put it in about, say, 80 to 85% perfect condition.
Okay.
And then I'll finish off with something like this to jewel the paint and remove any of the surface marring that might have been achieved from this and that compound.
Okay.
For that, I might charge, say, $600 or $700, okay? And then to go in and like really cut through, like to get a 95 percentile or better, paint correction, and regardless of product I'm going to put on it, I say, hey, we're going to need to do a multi-phase polishing process. I'm going to use a microfiber pad. I consider it really a 2-phase polishing process with the compounds that I've been using with diminishing abrasives. But for that, it's going to be about $900 to $1,000.
Okay.
Now, the $250, $300 job is going to look great, but you're going to see all the imperfections. And if you spend $300 today and you come back in a couple of weeks, it's not $1,000 minus the $300 you spent here,
Right.
because I have to start all the way from this point and then go backwards all the way to this phase.
Okay.
So I just want to warn people that, hey, you don't want to spend money twice.
Right.
If you want to wait a month to do the whole thing, or if you're happy with this, go this route.
Okay.
And when we judge that, that's when we tell my guys, hey, this is a X, Y, or Z.
Okay.
And so if it's a multi-stage polishing process, there would normally be 2 polishes that we're using, and it's really a 2-step process that we're using internally. For a DIY guy, it's probably better to go a 3-step measure, just for the safety concerns. Well, safety for the paint, safety for the aesthetic value.
And you're not
of what
going
it's
rotary at all.
I wouldn't go rotary
Okay.
at all with anybody that's
Okay.
doing it themselves.
Okay.
You really want something like that. You want to hand in hand. You want to
Okay.
work with somebody, and there's a lot of just hours of skill to understand the balancing and the pressures and different things.
Okay.
It's not complicated, but it takes some time to
Sure.
really get to know
Okay.
it.
That makes sense. A big component of paint polishing that I always hear people talk about is along with the speed or the RPM or whatever, it's like, well, make sure you're adding, medium pressure or 5 pounds of pressure or 10 pounds of pressure. But it's always like, what I always think, maybe it's just me, but like, what does that feel like, right? So
Right.
you bring in a scale to show us the weight of the machine, because how important is pressure behind the machine while polishing?
It's everything. Look at the
Okay.
weight of a car and how well it's going to perform with the suspension, going over speed bumps and those types of things. So, but the machine that you're using, I wanted to illustrate that, just the bare machine without anything on it, sitting on a car surface is about 4.5, not quite 4.25 pounds.
Okay.
Now, when I'm polishing the cars, now I'm gonna zero this out. Is that zeroed? Okay. So what I wanted to do is when I'm polishing a car, when someone says light pressure, medium pressure, heavy pressure,
Right.
no one's really giving me like add 10 pounds of pressure.
Right.
But I know I'm adding about 10 to 15 pounds when I feel it because I've tested it before. But what I wanted to kind of give everybody an idea is, with my hand sitting on it, it's going to give it a few pounds of pressure.
Okay.
And that's just guiding the machine to hold it steady. So if you add in that 4 pounds.
Yep. About 5 right now.
So you're about 9 to 10 pounds of pressure is what the average surface friction is going to be with the polish and the compound that you're using.
And that's just you kind of holding the machine steady, because some people will say apply no pressure, which is actually
Right.
kind of a false statement because
Well, you don't want to apply extra pressure.
extra pressure.
And that's the safest thing to tell someone that's new to this, because
Okay.
you apply pressure on these edges, regardless of the polish that you're using, you can certainly burn through it.
Okay.
The heat, the friction, the aggressiveness of weight against it is going to scrape it.
And do you
burn it.
want to put, maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but as you work to a more of a polishing stage, do you want to put even less pressure? So if you're starting with like a microfiber pad in your first cutting stage, is that the stage you want the most pressure
Yes.
that you're going to be applying? Okay.
Yes, most often it's going to be the cutting stage. I'm going to lean into it. And if I'm using something like a microfiber pad such as this is stacked up on, I'm going to really get in there on some areas and get closer to that 15-pound
You're
range.
almost dead on, yeah.
And this is the way I'm normally going to hold the machine.
Okay.
Or I'm going to put my palm on it.
Got it.
Whatever's kind of comfortable. But that's about the weight that I'm going to put on it. And then if I'm using a diminishing abrasive with a compound on this type of pad, I'll lean in on it on the first couple of passes, and then I ease up on it. And sometimes I'll either slow up or speed up the machine depending on what my mood is or what I kind of feel the paint is doing.
Okay.
And what that does on a two-phase polish that's a diminishing abrasive, the aggressive cutting nature of that compound is going to blaze through, shaving the imperfections out of the paint. But then as it heats up and gets past a certain point, it starts to kind of jewel the paint. So it's a two-phase process in my view, rather than taking the pad off the car and putting a new pad on and doing a second pass with a different polish and a different compound.
Okay.
So
I see what you're saying.
but the key is how much polish and compound that you're using for each pass, because the least amount of polish when you're finished on the car is really the ideal
Okay.
finishing technique. In other words, all right, one, you're heating up the paint to a certain degree, and it's going to soften the paint as it heats up.
Which I also heard, Tom was telling me, not to cut you off, but there's also the solvents that are used in the polish also soften the paint. So so sometimes you have this like dangerous combo, I guess, of like you're heating the polish, or you're heating the paint up with the friction of the polish and the pad and the machine, but then also you have the solvent softening the clear in the polish. It could be really a kind of a tricky situation.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, like my hands will crack from the chemicals I'm using and just washing, drying all the time. I'm not just going to dip my hands in some lotion and just glob it all over. It's just not going to do anything. You're using too much polish if there's a lot caked on the surface.
Okay.
So you need to either spread it out. But the last thing you really want to have to do is when you use too much polish, you want to break a system into one stage rather than the two phases that it needs, because that compound left on the car is still abrasive. And as you go to wipe it off with a towel, you have soft paint because you've just heated it up more. It's got more heat than its natural environment. And then you've got a compound with oils and chemicals in it that are also abrasive to the paint. Some people are using an IPA or something like that to wipe it, which is also a solvent that's going to soften the paint. And so all these different factors, when people are compounding a car and they're looking at it through the lights in the machine and go, damn, it's perfect. And they bring the machine off, they have like a very slim layer of compound on there, and they start to wipe it and they're like, oh wait, the towel sucks.
That's one thing I've never thought of, and this is why I love doing these videos, because one thing I never ever thought of, and I don't think it's been talked about, is like the abrasive. It makes so much sense. There's still abrasive on the panel, and you go to wipe it with a towel. Oh my
this
gosh.
distributes this takes an abrasive. This is why you can't really compound a car by hand, which was done 40 years ago. You're trying to do something with your hand in circles and stuff. Well, the pressure points on your fingers are going to be different. And even if you have a flat pad, that's why with sanding, a lot of times you're going to use a pad or some sort of a block to keep that level. This does that with the machine in a different surface to abrade and jewel the paint.
Okay.
So when you do this, you want to one, keep the pad flat on the surface at all times so that you're creating the friction in an evenly distributed motion.
Okay.
So a lot of guys will draw arrows on their backing plate to see that it's spinning around. You definitely want to see that it's spinning and not joggling around. This machine can tighten up in big grooves or edges. And then if you press down, it'll throw through.
Okay.
It's just but you want to be careful as a novice not to do those types of things because there's a reason that safety precaution is in there.
So don't put too much pressure.
Yes.
You don't want to be in the 20 pounds or something. There's no reason for that, right? Then you would switch up your pad.
Yeah, if you're polishing gel coat on a boat,
Okay.
you can really kind of lean in and get more aggressive on it.
Okay.
On a car, it has very thin paint. And
Yeah.
it's going to burn through if you get too aggressive.
Okay. So let's show, I kind of scuffed up the panel pretty bad. I don't know. Some people, this is 2000 grit sand. I don't know. I just messed up the panel really heavily with a buffing pad bag, right? But I thought everything that you've talked about would be great if we could kind of demo it with like maybe a 1-step, a 2-step, and then a 3-step, all using obviously the Picture Perfect polish.
Nice.
So, a light plug there. So, and I guess we'll see how well it does with different pads, but that's kind of the whole point of this. So if you want, you can show us. So if let's say this is a car that came in, right? This would be pretty bad, right? Or would this be an average car?
So let's go back and pedal back. And let's
I'm
say
the customer.
You're the customer, and this car fits the criteria, the size criteria of what I would charge $1,000 for a 3-stage process.
Okay.
Or $300 for a 1-step process. So why don't I'll start with your polish, and I'll start with one of these microfiber pads. We'll just start on the edge here.
Yeah.
And then I'll do a separate polishing process here, and then I'll do just the finishing process so we can look and see what the difference is between your polish. I know what the results would look like from the polishing compounds that I've used, so I'm going into this a little bit new, not understanding what this is going to look like, but I'm excited to see.
Yeah. Totally. Okay.
All right,
cool.
let's give it a whirl. So I'm going to start off with the microfiber pad, which is one of the more aggressive compounding techniques that I would use. And there's a couple things that I see a lot of people do when they put the polish on the pad. They'll start dotting it up. I don't really do that, I don't like to, but especially not with this pad because you want all these fibers standing up most all the time if they're standing up.
Okay.
Because that's when they're working most effective. When you dot it, it's going to switch this and it's going to dot it all over the pad. It's going to mat down the pad.
Okay.
I'm not saying that it's not going to work, but it's not going to be the most efficient work for the pad by doing something like that. Foam pads, it's okay. Traditional, you're going to see guys putting about 4 dots on a pad. Now, for this section right here, that is way too much polish and compound. But I want to make sure that the pad is seasoned all around, so I don't want to just put 1 dot and I don't want 4 tiny dots. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here. I'm going to drag some of the polish into the other side, and so that when I finish here, it shows that it's finished in a way that I would want to finish a panel, how I would want it to look when I'm done with this process. So I'm going to start kind of fast with the machine. Okay. I'm going to spread it out a lot, so you'll see me jiggling around and doing different crazy stuff over here. Okay. And then I'll look at the paint as I get to that second phase of this compound. You'll start to see me kind of work it slower or faster in different areas. Okay. But I want to get what I can done with this pad on this panel, but you'll see the drag over here.
Yeah.
All right, let's get on it.
Is the light in an okay spot then, or you want me to move
perfect.
it? Okay.
I'll just walk around the front now. When you start with the panel, what you want to do is I'm gonna slow the machine down to about a 2.5. I want a light spin. I don't want a heavy spin, and I'm actually just going to start on this side and spread it over. So,
want me to plug you in? Here, I got it.
It
only works if it's plugged in. Step 1, plug your machine in.
More air time.
Leave that in, baby. No edits, Brian.
Right.
No edits.
All right, so I'm gonna, as I go down, then I'm gonna come around.
So this is kind of what you would do. Like we sectioned it off to show a point, but okay. And then you went to speed 6 like right away. How much pressure?
I started off with a good 10 pounds, and now I'm about, or 15 pounds, now I'm about 10.
Okay.
I'm about 10 pounds of pressure now.
Okay.
So by slowing the machine down, I'm going to slow the heat.
Okay.
And I might slow down my pace a little bit more.
Okay.
So it helps cool the paint.
Okay.
There's still some of those microfine scratches in here from your scuffing.
Yeah.
But those would come out with more polish.
Got it. With more polish.
Yeah. I'm at about 10 pounds.
Okay. And there's very little polish left on where you're at. And that's what you kind of want it to look like?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I traditionally would have like way more on there.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it looks like this, then I want you as my customer because you're going to buy a lot of product.
But you don't need it.
You don't need
Okay.
that. You really you want to be minimally as possible.
Okay.
And you can see like to touch, there's not much to wipe down.
Right.
Now, I could have gotten these little guys out if I used probably all of that on here. I don't like to work such a tight area because I'm heating up such a small area that I would want to work most of this panel and come back to this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So the tighter the areas, you really don't want to just narrow them down so tight because you're heating up a small area of paint. Okay. You heat up, this area has time to cool down as I'm getting over here.
I see.
And then I'm coming back and then I'll work a pattern. I see guys going all over the place. You really want to box it in like a puzzle. Okay. And then you want to play like you're mowing the lawn with like a 50% overlap. Okay. So you're really coming over half and half. Okay. And it'll slowly spread that product across the panel.
So you really do want to work more than a 2x2 area?
Depending on. Okay. But yeah, 2x2 is a good safe zone. Like I would.
Yeah, we're pretty tight right here for demonstration purposes.
Okay. But again, I would want to spread the product out a little bit more to optimize the efficiency of all that we're doing here. Okay. That came out really nice. It looks like it finished really nice. The only trails I see are from like the light residue, so I can't really see holograms in here, which is what I would normally see lightly with an aggressive diminishing compound that a polish, that sort of thing. Now, this pad right now, you'll see it's a little bit matted in. I'll tell you why, because there's a lot of dead paint coming off here, but also it wasn't clayed, so there's a lot of contaminants in the paint. If I were to go back over this panel with another microfiber pad, all these fibers will be standing up.
Would you add more would you use this product to go back over it again?
Anytime, if I pull a microfiber pad off the car, the pad comes off the machine every single time without fail. Got it. Because at that point, the polish, you're going to have some kind of residue from the paint you're shaving off of the car and what other garbage is already in the clear coat, which has now embedded itself into this pad. Right, okay. We won't do it now, but I mean, if I were to come back over this clean pad panel, the polishing pad should come up and all the bristles will be standing up pretty much straight. Okay. But But going on, now we want to do, that came out really nice. The finish is much better than I anticipated. But what I would do next is, this is how I would polish a car and then go to the second phase, which would be using more pad like this.
Okay.
It's a medium pad open cell structure that open cell structure is going to allow more air in so that it reduces the heat. A closed cell structure is going to trap air at the edge of the pad. So it's better suited for a compound that's not as aggressive, say, as a microfiber pad. But on certain even soft paints, those work really great together because of the way that it just connects just to the surface and the pad surface. But we won't get into that right now.
Yeah, we can save that for another video.
We say that. Now, you know what? Let's take a towel and let's wipe that compound off of there. I'd be interested to see if anything kind of scuffs it when you're wiping it, but it looks like it's coming off pretty nice. Because I'm gonna do the same thing. Like, I guess it doesn't even matter.
What's your initial reactions on that polish?
I like how quick it moved. I can tell it wasn't a diminishing abrasive. It felt like once I finished, with a certain point that it was done. Aside from wiping it off, and just from my habits of wanting to leave as little residue as possible.
That's a massive tip, leaving as little residue as possible. That really is. I don't hear that talked about too often, and that's a massive little nugget there.
It's easy to use a lot of product and feel like you're doing
and I want people to use a lot of product because I own the product brand, but not really. I really want people to get a good result more than anything, and I think that realizing that too much product on the surface is going to be a bad deal for everyone involved, right? So
All right, so I had a little misfire here, so I got 5 dots.
This would be the because I was thinking this would be like the 3-step polish. Okay. So this would be like a 2-step.
Yes.
Okay.
So let's pretend that I'm using 3 separate polishes.
Got it. Okay.
I would use a medium cut finishing polish, if you will, for something to do a 2-stage.
Perfect.
And I would honestly expect more. I would expect finishing results as that, but not the compounding results. So I'll see how this looks now. I'm going to kind of do the same thing, but I'm just going to start here with the product that I have on it.
You're getting no spray, no compound spray. And are you starting with less pounds of pressure?
Just to spread it out so it doesn't sling.
Okay. But as you start to polish, are you up to 10 pounds or 15 pounds or?
I'm about maybe a little more than 5 right now.
Oh, okay. So significantly less than where you started with the compounding stage.
If I press too hard, it starts to slow down the rotation.
Because you're squishing the pad. Because the pad is softer.
No pressure on these edges.
Okay. Doing that just to get rid of some product. Okay.
Excuse me.
And now you're virtually no pressure still?
Yeah. So that's a lot more polished than I would typically want on a panel left
Okay.
behind.
Okay.
I drug some of it over here, but just I didn't want to sit here and do that for 10 minutes.
Okay.
But you can clearly see, so this is a perfect combination of what we were talking about of using sort of a finishing polish with a medium pad, with a more aggressive compound that works with that, like a more. Yours is interesting because it's an aggressive compound with that pad, but it doesn't feel an aggressive compound with that foam pad. So I'm curious about
I
a
tried to
couple
make something
things.
unique, you know? Tried to make something really unique.
So now we look at the difference here, and I don't know if it can be seen. I can clearly see it.
Okay.
The scratches here are more apparent
Yes.
than the scratches here.
Yes.
These will clean out with a microfiber pad if I were to have continued a little bit longer.
Okay.
These would not have gotten any better with a foam pad.
Right.
But the gloss is virtually
Higher.
the same.
Okay.
So that's an interesting combination, one, because if that achieves with a microfiber pad what this finishes at,
Right.
then that changes a lot of the game
Sure.
in the whole.
I understand.
Then it is one polish, and then whatever pad you choose.
Right. Which is what I was going for, but I to set the foundation, I wanted to talk about kind of traditional methods, and then in a later video we can mess around with why my polish is different. But I still want to be able to do exactly what you're demoing, which is important to me with the polish, is like I still want it to act like a finishing polish with a finishing pad, but I also want it to be able to cut with an aggressive pad, and it's the cherry on top that it could finish with a cutting pad.
That's a
right? It's a tall or it's a unicorn, right? I'm not saying my product's a unicorn, but when I went to Tom and Walter with this idea, because it's kind of what I stand for with my brand of like I'm trying to do something that doesn't exist. Because I like 3D1. I know you like Kosh Chemi. Like everyone has their favorites, and that's great. But so I thought, well, I already have a favorite. Why would I launch another product that's like another Me Too product?
Right.
Like I'm not interested in that. Doesn't excite me. I know a lot of brands do that, but so I go for unicorns, right? And I've showed it in this with the Super Soaper and whatever. Like I try to create unicorns because I think that's exciting.
Oh, absolutely
You know,
it is.
I think that's fun. That's fun to me. It's not fun to create another 3D one.
No.
It already exists.
Hey, I made this one. It's slightly better.
It smells like
costs the
oranges,
same.
and it costs exactly.
All right, so now we're here to the finishing stage. Is if I was doing a one-stage polish to get it nice and shiny, but a lot of the imperfections would still be left behind if I wouldn't have gone through with a multiple stage.
Which most people, not to cut you off, but a lot of people are okay with, right?
Oh, a lot of people are
I think
definitely
it's Mike
okay.
Phillips that is like almost famous for saying like people just want shiny paint that is slick or something like that.
Yeah.
Like the vast majority of people are not looking for perfect paint all the time.
They're really not.
They just want shiny paint.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, if you get a black car like this is a black hood, it's going to show the defects because of the reflection off the surface in the sunlight.
Right.
So you'll see those marks. If it was white or silver, you wouldn't see nearly the depth of what we're seeing here.
Right.
So
I noticed you use a little less polish than before. Is that you just, I know I threw you into this kind of blind, but is that you learning the polish and how much you actually need, or?
good question, fair. Normally with the finishing stage, I want to use a very small amount of polishing. So the surface would normally look something like this shiny, not like this dull.
Okay.
So you have to bear in mind, I'm also kind of defeating a little bit of the purpose here because I'm not working on the best surface.
Yeah.
But it's still going to show me the gloss factor I'm going to achieve, and it's going to show the imperfections that would be left behind.
Okay.
And again, I want to have the finishing process to show as little polish as if it's just a little bit of a dusting.
Okay.
So I'll probably drag some more over in here as well.
Got it. So a little mixture of both, I guess.
This one I can usually start up a little bit faster. You know,
You're working your way down on pressure, right?
Yeah.
So you're based almost like no pressure
yeah, you don't want a lot of pressure on this finishing
because you're not
stage.
expecting it. Its job is not to correct any paint.
Correct.
Its job is just
to gloss
it up.
Yeah, I call it the jeweling stage.
The jeweling
really.
stage. Yep.
So, and again,
Showing your age
you'll see
with
me
that.
pulling the pad off on this. A foam pad, I'm not really concerned with having the. You know, you could do spots if you want to. I still don't care to do that. I like
Because
to
there's
spread
no
it out.
fibers to push down. Like
Yeah,
with the
so
microfiber pad.
you're safe at doing that and pulling the machine off.
Okay.
But It's got very light pressure, maybe less than 5 pounds.
Okay.
You can see how much more the wheel's spinning.
Yeah.
How quicker it is.
Because you're basically just holding the machine in place, right?
And you can see how tight the weaves are on the pattern. That's really how you want them.
Okay.
Really tight weaves.
Okay.
And so I feel with this product, once it's kind of done, it's finished doing what it's doing, at least with the pad that you have on here. This pad's
What are you seeing, not to interrupt, I keep saying that, but what are you seeing when you say when it's done, it's done? What does that visually look like?
Well, I could see when I was doing the first panel, the scratches that were being removed, and I could see the scratches that were, perpendicular to the pattern I was kind of stroking.
Okay.
And so once I spread the polish out, when I had the ample amount of polish that was needed for that friction and that surface with your product, it cut through the scratches really fast.
Okay.
But once it kind of got past a certain point, and I think it was just because there wasn't enough polish on there, I don't think I would have wanted to use more polish and work that tighter of an area.
Okay.
But if I were to only have worked that tight of an area, I would have worked it twice with that microfiber pad.
Okay.
And I would have removed the remaining scratches that I'm seeing.
Okay.
But once it was done, it was done.
Okay.
On this, the foam pad with a medium abrasive pad, it's a little thicker in the cushion, it's a tighter weave, but it's still an open cell structure, so it's absorbing a lot of heat. It cut through about half as well as what the initial did would. So I would generally say, if someone paint was in, say, 60% perfect condition, which would be, say, this panel, or well, this wasn't scuffed up like this was.
Right.
This is still say 60% perfect, but I'll give it a 70 because the gloss level brought it up.
Right.
But it's still really, all those scratches, it's still 60% if you were to give it a percentage perfect.
Got it.
Because to level all that down, I'm gonna have to start from the initial stage of the cutting process. What I find interesting with your product though is it doesn't feel like I need to change the product with the pad. It feels like the pad is going to deliver what needs to finish at.
Okay.
And so I don't know if I could finish with a microfiber pad just yet. That would be really exciting. But what I don't see that I normally see in most all products is the heavier marring with a heavier compound that I know absolutely is going to require a finishing stage, which I can normally do with a finishing pad and a lighter abrasive polish or a finishing polish. We'll normally fix that if I've done that 2 phases properly.
Got it.
Or this, whatever scratches were left behind from the initial stage will still be there.
If this stage takes the initial cutting stage, if that, just for round numbers, if that took 2 hours to go around a whole car to complete that stage, how much time should the finishing stage take? Would it be half as much time?
Maybe a quarter to a third.
Okay.
So the finishing stage, you're really you're solving some of the problems that are left behind with some of the marring. If you start with a wool pad, you're not going to go to a finishing stage. It's going to need something in between.
Okay.
And you can use a wool pad and a microfiber pad, technically the same product, and the microfiber pad will finish off, better.
Right.
But normally I'm still using 2 different polishes, compounds to really get the most aggressive cut with a wool pad, and then a lesser aggressive cut with a microfiber.
I want you to try it. Maybe we could do a video of you trying the Picture Perfect polish with the wool pad.
Yeah,
I think that'd be fun.
Because I would buy this product absolutely and have it on my shelf. I'm not saying that as a plug, but I would definitely have this on my shelf in a company with everything else. If it does things that I don't know that it could do, but it might, then it would eliminate the need to have several polishes.
Right, which is kind of my goal, right? Especially for the DIYer kind of prosumer market that I think is really kind of evolving and developing, unlike I think we've ever seen before. I think there's been a big divide of like professionals and then people that just go buy Turtle Wax or whatever on the shelf, and this like prosumer, this educated consumer, I guess. Got it. Oh, flew away. This educated consumer, lost my train of thought. But yeah, that's kind of the market that I'm going after. So if more to come with you, definitely on polishing. I think this is great. I'm really valuing your input on the polish, and to hear, I'm sorry that it's kind of like messing things up. Traditional things.
Oh, not at all.
Not messing it up, but it's
a great improvement, I would think.
Yeah.
If
it's opening the door to more questions, I guess.
I would absolutely use it seeing what I'm seeing now.
Okay.
I would absolutely eliminate some of the things in my arsenal if it achieved some of the things that you think it might. And it would certainly eliminate a lot of time spent.
Yeah.
And for this type of thing, it's interesting because a super abrasive polish, you don't want to put it in the hands of a novice, because that's when the paint is heating up the most. It's a lot more susceptible. I would never recommend putting 15 pounds of pressure on a polisher for anybody that's just learning how to use the tool. But that's the reality of how it should be used with someone that knows how to use it properly. And it just takes some time to develop those types of skills. I like the polish.
Okay. So if we were to summarize, again, I think this video kind of took us, I had one idea for it, but then what I love about doing videos with other people is and we saw this with Tom too, it like goes off onto all these different paths. And so, but if we were to kind of like summarize what we were trying to showcase in this video, I think people definitely should take their scale that they weigh themselves on or something, and
to have a general idea.
To have a general idea of what that feels like. I think that's a huge nugget. But like, if we could summarize it as kind of an outro, how would you summarize this video?
Well, I would say, we wanted to talk about what the polishing pad combinations might look like, and we see the aggressive nature of what a microfiber pad can accomplish with treating the paint, removing scratches. We see how much a medium foam pad would take as far as scratch removal, and then we see what a finishing pad. So we understand the 3 pads that could be used, but those 3 pads I would normally use with a different product.
Right.
And so this really sums up to, are we able to use one single polishing process or one single product, liquid, to achieve the results by changing the accompanying pad? And I think you're on a real strong go with this, and I think the finish line is pretty close if it achieves what you're looking for.
Cool. Well, I appreciate that because I consider myself a mediocre paint polisher. So to have someone like you and the echelon of cars that you've told me you've worked on, I'm excited to get that feedback. So we've gotten the feedback from others, but again, it's part of developing the polish and the pad and the system is all about getting feedback from multiple other people. So I appreciate that. I will link Jim's Instagram below where you want people to follow you. And I appreciate you stopping by, chiming in, and doing a video like this. So
it's
appreciate
been fun.
it. Yeah, cool.
All right.
So, all right, guys, subscribe for more, and I'll catch you on the next video. See ya.